going to take 5. We're in John chapter 6. And just a little bit of recap. Last time I taught, Jesus had said that if you want to be one of his disciples, you're going to have to eat his flesh and drink his blood. And I explained what that meant. But it was very hard teaching. And so we pick up here in John 6 verse 60. When many of his disciples heard it, they said, "This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it?" But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, said to them, "Do you take offense at this? Excuse me. Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus knew from the beginning who those were who did not believe, and who it was who would betray him. And he said, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father." After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So Jesus said to the 12, "Do you want to go away as well?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God." Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is a devil." He spoke of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was going to betray him. Alright. What happened here? You had some hard teaching. And Jesus follows up the hard teaching and said, you think this is tough? What if you see the Son of Man go back up where he came from? So basically he's now saying he came from heaven. He's saying he's the Son of God. Alright? So add that to the hard teaching that he had. And it says many of his disciples stopped following him. So these were folks who would have claimed to have been a follower of Jesus until it got too hard. If you remember back in our study of Matthew and Mark and Luke, all three of those Gospels, we did a study on the parable of the sower. And we talked about one of the soils, when things got hard, they didn't stick around. That's what you've got here. The teaching's gotten hard. When Jesus was feeding the crowds, and they had overflows of food, the crowds were coming to him. Alright? When he was talking about eternal life and this kind of stuff, they loved it. But now that he says there's a real commitment involved, a commitment so strong, it's like eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And then he goes on to say that he is the Son of God. They just can't handle it. So a whole lot of them, it says many of his disciples leave. I'm wearing a t-shirt, "Never give up." And it is one of my mottos, and I believe that's absolutely essential in the faith, in the Christian faith, is to never give up. But he says something here that he already said once. He says, "This is why I told you no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father." So the fact is, God had not chosen those folks to follow Jesus. They chose to follow him for a little while, but because God hadn't chosen them, they wound up leaving. I want you to stay right where you are. I know we're getting a little deep here, and it's even hard for me to understand, but we're going to go to 1 John chapter 2. I don't do this often, but 1 John chapter 2 verse 19. And this is a passage concerning Antichrist, but there is one verse I want to just lift out of here. Verse 19, "They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out, that it might become plain that they all are not of us." Now, while I would never, ever begin to tell you I can tell who's saved and who isn't, because I don't and can't and would, I don't have the authority to do that. God does. There's just a general principle here that if people don't stick around, they were never chosen by God to begin with. They were never really of us. So, I've taught several passages here in which tell me I don't believe anybody can lose their salvation. Okay, and I could be wrong on that. However, if somebody starts off and then eventually leaves and stays gone, okay, pretty good chance they were never really saved to begin with. I think that's what It's taught there in 1 John 2, and I think that's what Jesus teaches here, that nobody can come to him unless it's granted by the Father. Now, we're going a little long, but I want to stick with it. He asked the 12, he says, do you want to go away as well? All right? And they say, Lord, to whom shall we go? And that, Simon Peter's the one that really spoke up and said that, and I love his heart. Listen, following Jesus is tough. It really is. When you follow Jesus, you're going to face lots of opposition. We have an enemy, Satan, who's going to oppose you, and he's also going to use other people, family members, church members, people you would never expect are going to oppose you at times. And it is very difficult. But you got to ask yourself, where else you're going to go? Where else are you going to go? Jesus has not only the words of eternal life, he offers eternal life. Alright? And Jesus answered them and said, did I not choose you? You know, I picked you guys out. I knew you were the right guys. God told me to pick you. His Father told him to pick those guys. They were chosen from before the foundation of the world, according to Ephesians, just like you and I are. And he said, but one of you is a devil. Now, there was one that was chosen for a very specific purpose. And I don't understand all of God's ways, but Judas was chosen to betray Jesus. You can get into what's fair about all that. I'll let God decide what's fair. That's just the way things are, okay? I am so grateful God chose me. I'm so grateful God chose me. I never would have chosen him if he had not chosen me. And if you're watching and if you're a Christian, it's because God chose you first. That's why you eventually chose him. All right? Thank him for that. Don't take any credit. All right? If you were able to look at the gospel and respond to it, it's because God enabled you to do that. And he doesn't enable everyone to do that. And I don't know why. Okay? But the fact that he did choose me, he was very merciful and kind. Way over. Thanks for sticking with me. This was more of a take 7.5 today. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll try to keep it to 5 minutes on the next edition of Take 5.